Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/292, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Did I say that twice? Of course I did. Or text at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. You think I would do these intros and I would get them right every time? No. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 292nd edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. I join you from stormy Washington, D.C., where there is a storm here in the stormy town. So the possibility of power outages, totally possible while I record this. So we'll see how this all goes. On this edition of the show, finally, I talk about bikes. 292 editions of the show in. I'm finally going to talk about the right bike for you, maybe. Touring bike essentials. What I look for in a touring bike. Because as you all know, I ride 3 different bikes for touring, and each one has its pluses and minuses depending on what kind of ride I'm doing, where I'm going, how I'm traveling, things like that. But if you are new to bike touring or you're looking for your N+1, your next bike, what should you be thinking about? On this episode, we're going to talk about the things that I look for in a touring bike. But first, we've got some housekeeping here as we wind down the summer. As many of you have probably been able to figure out just based on the content of the show, I have not been on a bike very much over the last month or two or more, actually, because I'm playing the role of caregiver here at home because of my wonderful partner who has gotten a brand new left hip. That's what happens when we get to this age. And it's going well. Everything's cool. And I've got a fun tour that's on the horizon. If not immediately now. Now, I am planning on announcing said tour on the very next Pedal Shift Live, which is going to be coming, write this one down, on Sunday, September 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And I'm going to, before I continue, yes, September 11th. I, for many years, like many folks, have eschewed doing things on September 11th. And I think in the last couple of years, I think I have decided, as somebody who was in DC during the attacks, that it's not time to move on, but it's time to move forward. And so I am now going to do things on September 11th and never forget, of course, but just in case anybody thought that it was odd that I was doing something on September 11th. That is my mindset. Sunday, September 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So I believe that ends up catching most of the listeners all around the world. I hope you are able to join. Of course, as always, this will be recorded. It will be that next Thursday's podcast. We're going to be doing a few things in addition to mentioning the summer to fall tour preview. That is the quasi unofficial title to it. We're going to be doing something kind of special, and that is around then, I think, as I mentioned on Twitter the other day, we should be clocking in at about 1 million downloads for this little program here. And that's kind of fun and interesting, and I think landmarky enough to actually acknowledge. So what I would love from all of you who are listening, if you would so choose, give a holler. Send an email to pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text 202-930-1109 and let me know, what has the show meant to you over the course of the last 1 million of you downloading the program. I'm still sort of awed by all of this, but it is, numbers don't lie, man. And so for the next couple of weeks in between now and then, I will occasionally throw up the countdown on Twitter so that everybody can see. Will we be at 1 million on September 11th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time? I have no idea. Will we have passed it? No idea. But I think that it's around then-ish that we should be right around the corner or past the corner for 1 million downloads. And I can't thank you all enough for listening to this crazy program for all these years. And I still pronounce program in this context because reasons, I guess. The other thing, of course, we're going to do is the patented Ask Me Anything. So in addition to sending what you are what the show has meant to you, throw in your bicycle touring questions, or as I have gotten from time to time, your life questions that are funny for me to answer. Like I think 2 or 3 years ago, folks asked me Marvel or DC, Star Trek or Star Wars, and of course I answered all of that. So yeah, so live show September 11th. 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can get all the details, and you can check it out on the Pedal Shift YouTube channel, which if you're subscribed and you've got the notification thing going, it will let you know when I'm going live. Or you can just go over to pedalshift.net/live, and it will be embedded there for you to watch. Once again, September 11th, Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I hope to see you all there. So on this edition, we are going to be talking about touring bike essentials. For reasons that are unclear to me, my most popular post on the website over at pedalshift.net has always been a series of 3 different posts that I put up called My Favorite Touring Bikes. And they are old and outdated, and I don't know why anybody still clicks through to them, but they do. One of the bikes isn't even made anymore, the Novara Safari. One of the bikes I don't own anymore, I think. And then the other bike was a cop-out, which was use whatever you have. It was like the early days of Pedal Shift before the podcast. And it's just funny that those are the ones that still get clicks all the time. So I thought, hey, maybe I should do a podcast on all of this 292 episodes later. So let's talk a little bit about this. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to break the bike down section by section, basically, for the kinds of things that I look for. But let me start off with the prime directive here. There really is no such thing as a touring bike, in a way. Sure, there are things that make some bikes better at touring than others, but you don't need all or even some of these things that I'm going to be talking about. For those of you who are more interested in bike packing, I think that this might be a little less true, because I do think there are very specific things you need for bike packing. But at the same time, I think the prime directive is still true for bike packing as well. You can use whatever bike you want to and strap stuff to it, and it is a bike packing bike or a bike touring bike. But for bike packers, you know better than most that there are very specific things about riding single track. You can't have a wide profile. And if you're going to be on something other than pavement, gravel, single track, whatever, you're going to need to kind of pay a little more attention to your tires in that sense. So other than a very specific type of ride, you can use just about any bike for just about any kind of tour. So that's the prime directive, which is basically ignore for the next 20 to 30 minutes whatsoever, or pick and choose what I talk about here as to what makes most sense for you. All right, let's start off by talking about the wheelbase. I don't talk about this really ever, but if you want a really good touring bike, and I'll use touring bike here by saying, are you going to haul a lot of stuff? Are you going to go fully loaded? This is kind of more important than others. The longer the distance between the hubs of your 2 tires, the better your bike is going to generally be for handling loads. #physics. So like I said, this is much more important for fully loaded touring. Now, not a lot of bikes are made this way anymore, at least based on what I've seen, because I don't tend to see a lot of kind of classic touring bikes. They certainly exist. The long haul truckers and those others, they certainly do exist, and they're out there. But what I would mention to you is, if you're comparing bikes, get out the tape measure, measure the distance between the 2 wheels. If you don't have the statistics or the guide that tells you what the length of the wheelbase is for that bike, a longer distance between them means that it's going to be more stable when you're carrying more weight. This is going to be a lot less important for you bike packers because longer wheelbases are more for fully loaded touring. All right, so that's the first thing. Take a look at the wheelbase. That may or may not be super important to you, but for fully loaded tourists, that's fairly important, or it's something to look at. Material. What's your frame made of? I'm kind of one of those steel is real kind of guys for a bunch of different reasons. It's strong. It's also got, paradoxically, some flex to it because it allows it to handle road vibration and the occasional jarring bumps that you're going to get at any given time. If you go through a pothole or if there's a rut or anything along those lines. Steel is better for all of that. What's the downside? Well, steel is one of the heavier materials that you can have out of a bike. So if you're looking at something that's less weighty, steel may not be the right choice for you. I tend to prefer it, and I think that for most touring bikes, they do tend to be made out of steel. Now, that said, one of my bikes is made out of aluminum, and it was very much designed to be a touring bike. It was one of the first touring bikes that RAI put out. It's the Green Goblin, and they made it out of aluminum. Why? I don't know, but they did. Maybe because steel was more expensive back then. I think it was from the 90s is when that bike came out. Does that mean that a bike like that is bad and should never be used for touring? Well, clearly not. I am not a carbon bike guy. I'm not a weight guy, but I know many of you are interested in using carbon fiber, titanium. They make lots of bikes out of titanium. Is that all out? No, not necessarily, but most of the time, most bike tours tend to be on bikes that are made out of steel. It doesn't mean that you can't do it with those things. It just means that they are not used as often, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. One other thing that I've heard from folks who do expedition style touring, and that'll come up actually in the next section as well, is that one of the reasons to do steel is because if you're somewhere in the middle of nowhere, anywhere, any town is going to have somebody with a welding kit. And if your frame has some damage to it or a crack or something breaks, your rack breaks or something along those lines, that you can weld that up more easily for steel rather than other materials. And I believe that. I just don't think that that's necessarily a common thing unless that's the type of tour that you've got in mind. It's something to consider if you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere. Are you rolling through Mongolia or something like that? There is going to be some handy person with a torch and the ability to repair a steel frame bike and maybe not a carbon fiber bike. So material is something to think about. I think it's one of those things that it's less important unless you're doing really robust touring. Next up, these are important. Your wheels. Now, I have had incredibly good luck with my wheels. I have never gotten a custom wheel build before. And I have broken very few spokes in my history of touring. It happened on the original tires that came with the Goblin, and that was because, as it turned out, those spokes were damaged for all sorts of different reasons. You can go back and listen to past episodes for that whole hilarious scenario. Generally speaking, the more spokes that you have, particularly on your rear tire, the better for carrying weight. I have had unusually good luck with those stock tires. I know that there are wheel builders out there that pride themselves in building really robust, good wheels built especially for hauling weight, for hauling folks on tour. But most people don't get a custom wheel built. Most people don't have the luck that I've had with rolling on stock tires. If you've got a really good wheel builder at your local bike shop, and by the way, that's not always a thing that's there. It tends to be a little more specialized. Someone at a local bike shop should always have somebody who's building wheels, but are they really good at it is another thing. If you do have a local bike shop and you've ever had problems with spokes, or you are about to go on a titanically huge tour and you want to make sure that you've got a really good wheel, consider working with that wheel builder. Get a wheel with 36 spokes on it. 32 spokes is often enough, but 36 is super robust if you're going to be riding real heavy. So I guess I'm speaking again, as I mentioned before, to your expedition tour types out there. Those are going to be situations where you're going to be hauling a lot. You're going to be in adverse conditions a lot. And if you're going to be hauling a lot of weight with you, go with that. Spend the money on the 36 spoke wheel set. It will really pay dividends off to you. Have I ever done it? No. But I don't do expedition touring, or at least not yet. I think if I ever were to do something like that, I would definitely consider doing that. Getting a more professional wheel set done for any bike that I would use on such a thing. So corollary to wheels. What about the wheel size? Well, here we go. there are a lot of different wheel sizes out there. When I first got into touring, there were basically, based on my research back then, roughly two different types. There were 700Cs, and then there were 26 inchers. And 26 inchers would tended to come on mountain bikes and things along those lines. Nowadays, we have so many different sizes. And if you want more info on the more exotic sizes, especially for gravel bikes, our friends over at Pathless Pedaled have so much info on all of that. I frankly am a bit agnostic on all of this. I have 3 bikes. They all 3 have different tire sizes. I have my main touring bike's got a 700C. The Green Goblin, the secondary touring bike's got 26-inch tires, and the Brompton has those little clown bike-sized tires, the size of which I do not recall at the moment. Is it 12 inches? I can't remember, but they're really small, maybe 9. So the idea here is that it doesn't matter from a touring perspective which one you take unless it matters. So let's go back to you global expedition touring types. I have read, and I believe that in other countries outside of the United States, that 26-inch tires are much more ubiquitous. I assume that they are not called 26-inch tires in metric countries, but the point is that that size is much more standard around the world. And so if you go out on a big global expedition tour with those exotic gravel bikes that have, what are they, like 690s or 650s or something like that. I think there's 650 or there's a 650. You may have a very hard time sourcing a replacement tire, or worse, a replacement wheel if the wheel goes, but certainly would have problems with your tires. We'll get more to tires in a moment, but of course your wheel size is going to dictate the size of your tires. So I would say, again, do the research on this, see what makes sense for you. I don't think that there is a substantial difference between a 700C, say, and a 26-inch. It may impact how the geometry of the frameworks and all of that other kind of stuff that, honestly, I can't be bothered with. I hop on a bike, and does it feel good? Does it ride well? That's usually how I go with. But I will say, when you make choices on wheel size, it dictates your tire size as well. And sometimes it's easier to get tires of a certain size in different places. So just be mindful of all that. And like I said, another shout out, go check out Pathless Pedal for much more on wheel size. Tires. So of course your tire size is going to be dictated by your wheel size. That we're going to set aside. As you all probably know, if you've listened to the show for any period of time, I'm all in on Schwalbe Marathon Pluses, largely for their puncture resistance. They are great. They are a little on the heavier side, but honestly, I don't care about that. The marginal difference in weight between a Schwalbe Marathon Plus and anything else is just not outweighed at all by the fact that they are, when they're in good shape, puncture resistant, pretty puncture resistant. But as we've all learned from my experience podcasting about all this, I've had a couple of occasions where I have gotten flats, punctures on Schwalbe Marathons, both the pluses and the supremes, when the tire is worn a little bit. So just remember, when a tire wears, it's not as thick. And when it's not as thick, that means a thorn can get through, or whatever can get through, a radial tire wire, which I've definitely had before on other tires as well. They're just not as bulletproof. So inspect them. Make sure that you are aware of what condition your tire is in, because they are consumables, just like your brake pads and anything else that you may have that wears down over time. Make sure that you're looking at them. The other element around tires is whether you're tubed or tubeless. And I have historically been all tubes all the time. But I'm not opposed to tubeless. Sure, I make fun of you all. I don't make fun of you. I poke a little fun at you for being a part of a cult, but I too am a member of a cult. I own a Brompton. You know, there's nothing more culty than being a Brompton owner. But tubeless is a really fascinating thing from a touring standpoint. I think you're going to get a ton of different opinions on it. It is done quite often. It is certainly done more often in the bike packing space. I would say study up on that. Look into it, see if it's right for you. It does require, obviously, different setup than just buying a bunch of random tubes and carrying a pump with you, which is what I do. It comes with pluses and minuses, and one of these days I'm actually going to do a whole show on it, but I'm actually going to sit back and ask questions of somebody who knows a lot more about it rather than me just opining about it out of sheer ignorance, which really is half my show, quite frankly. Next up, gearing. Let's talk a bit about gearing, but I'm going to rely back on a couple of older shows. I believe both of which have been in the best ofs. Whether or not they're still in the last 100 episodes, probably not. So they may make another appearance again as a best of. These are episodes 015 and 049, where I talked about gearing. And the reason why I talked about it twice relatively early in the run of the pod is because this was the biggest lesson for me from the beginning of bike touring. And I talked about this, I believe, on last episode, that learning about gearing made all the difference for me and made me less afraid for hills. I used to just be like constantly having hills in my head. They lived rent free in my head the whole time. And so as a result, once I learned a little bit more about gearing, everything got a lot better. So the one thing that I want you to do is go check out a gear inch calculator, and you can just Google that and you will find them. And what you do is you end up plugging in a few things. You plug in basically the crankset and your cassette and your tire size, your wheel size. And what that does is it gives you a something called a gear inch, which is a calculation of relatively how climby that particular gear is and that particular gear range is. And what you want from a touring perspective, and I think that this is broadly true for touring and bikepacking too, is you want to be more climby and less speedy in terms of your gearing. And, you know, a lot of people, when I've read lots of different comments about this kind of thing, folks will be like, oh, well, I really want a broad range so I can go faster in flats. I'll tell you what, I so rarely end up going into my third chain ring to go as fast as I can on my more robust touring bike. I do it more frequently on the Green Goblin just because I have a shorter range of gearing on that. But I do from time to time go into the most speedy, highest gear possible on that bike. I almost never do it on the Safari, the newer Safari. Here's what I've got on that one. I've got a 44, 32, 22 crankset. So it's a triple. And then on the rear cassette, I've got an 11 to 34. I talk all about this, by the way, on, I think, episode 049. Well, maybe it's on 15 as well. Listen to both of those or go check out the show notes for those. Of course, it's pedalshift.net/015, pedalshift.net/049. So that gives me a really fantastic climbing range and a very lowest gear. And that is everything when you're climbing big hills. You could just spin up a hill, and does it take longer? Sure, but you don't end up pressing into your pedals the whole time, which is what I struggled with early on before I understood this and before I made the upgrade on what the stock crankset and cassette was on that particular bike. So that's something for you to look at, understand, etc. Does that mean that I'm telling everybody to run out and get a 44, 32, 22 crankset and 11 to 34 cassette? No, because technology changes all the time. And, you know, there's been all sorts of different changes in, popularity of different setups for touring bikes. I think that the era of the triple crankset is kind of maybe in the rear view mirror. I probably would not get a triple next time. I probably would end up getting a double. Why? I just don't use all the gears, especially at the high end. So I would probably think more about a double and maybe think about, okay, what kind of range do I really want for that? And then go from there. So, and how would I do that? I would use those gear inch calculators. So go check that all out. Much more information on those earlier episodes of the pod, but spend time on this. It's important. And what you may find is that the bike that you buy is not ready for prime time, or it's something where you're like, okay, I'll ride this for a season, but you know what? I have swapping out the crankset or the cassette as the first thing that I'm going to throw money at when I can. But does that mean you can't ride on any given bike? Of course not. You can ride on a fixed gear. You can ride on a single speed. You can do it. It's just a question of what do you want for touring. All right, brakes. This is another one where I'm kind of like, whatever. I'm agnostic. Most bikes these days do disc brakes over rim brakes. I frankly have never had any issue with rim brakes, just because that's all I've had. All three of my bikes have rim brakes. I replaced those brake pads really easily. I remember back when I was a kid, I struggled with how to adjust all of that. Now I can do it on the fly. I'm pretty good at it now because I've done it so much. That said, I probably would end up getting a disc braked bike for whatever my next bike is somewhere down the road, just because I think that disc brakes are just more popular now, and it would be harder to find myself a rim braked bike. Now, of course, your choice on brakes are going to impact your tires too, your wheels, actually, I should say. The upside of disc brakes is that there's no wear on the sides of your rims. I will say this, I have ridden my bikes a lot, and I've never had to replace wheels because of rim damage. But that's also because if I do one thing while on tour, it's making sure that I clean the grip on the rims and around the brake pads as well, so that you're not going to get nearly as much wear as a result of that. So brakes, you're probably going to get disc brakes, but don't be afraid of rim brakes if you've got a sweet deal on a bike that you're looking at, and it has rim brakes. I've had great luck with it over the years. Pedals. This is another one. Actually, there's a bunch of these where I'm just sort of like, guys, do whatever you want. Pedals. I'm a flats guy. I have had bikes with strap-ins. I have seen people insist that they must have clip-ins of some type, or clipless pedals or something along those lines for their pedals. You do you. Go with whatever is the most comfortable for you. I have read all sorts of different people say, oh, but if you strap in or if you clip in, you get more mechanical advantage. Apparently that's bunk. If you read some studies on it, the upstroke actually doesn't give you a measurable amount of extra performance, which surprises me, quite frankly. But I found I injured my Achilles tendon on a big ride that I did, the climate ride, which I mentioned frequently enough. I was in really bad shape by the end of it because I was using the strap-ins. Now, was it the straps that did it? I don't know. But ever since I dropped those, I've never had tendon problems again. So it could have been a me problem, could have been all sorts of things, but I've been a flats guy ever since. And you can't make me do clip-ins or straps. You can't do it. But you do you. Ride your ride. Do whatever is best for you. Handlebars. Okay, this gets into all sorts of things. I strongly prefer multiple hand positions or very ergonomic grips when it comes to handlebars. I love the mustache bar. I've got it on two different bikes, the two touring bikes I have. For the Brompton, I've got these fantastic ergonomic grips that are at the bar ends. I've never had hand problems on that bike, which is kind of crazy for a flat barred bike. One thing that I don't care for myself is I don't like drop bars, and that is unusual in the touring world. Most touring bikes, the classic touring bikes, are drop handlebars. And, you'll get a lot of folks who swear by, oh, I can be on the hoods, I can change my hand positions a lot. Hey, if that's how you like to ride, then go for it. That's what matters, is what's comfortable to you. I am finding, as I mentioned on the past show, that I'm starting to look at maybe a more upright style. I think riding more on the Brompton has gotten me to be more interested in that on my other touring bikes. So on my main Novara Safari, I've upped the handlebar position a little bit, so it's a slightly more upright rather than more aggressive crouched down position. We'll see on the next tour how that all goes, because I'm planning on using that for the next tour. So handlebars, if you're brand new to all of this, I really would strongly urge you to try different types of bikes if you can. See how it feels. Do you want to ride more upright, or do you want to have a more down position? Do you like drops? Go with it. Go with whatever most comfortable for you. But I will say the number one issue most people have, or one of the big issues people have, is that their hands will hurt. Now, it's not always the handlebar itself that's the issue. Sometimes that's going to be a bike fit issue. So we'll talk more about bike fits in a little bit here, but your style of handlebar is important, and make sure you pick the right one for you. Saddle. Again, I am a stock saddle kind of guy, although one of my bikes is a Brooks, which a lot of people swear by. It's kind of part of the quote unquote uniform for touring bicycles. Many of you need something special. I've had good luck with stock saddles. I would say for this, talk to your local bike shop. If you have an enlightened local bike shop like Lattice Bikes in Portland, Oregon, they've got a saddle library. That is sadly more rare than I wish it were. But if you've got the opportunity to try out various types of saddles, I would absolutely encourage you to do that, because there are so many different types, so many different materials that, you could do leather, you could do synthetic, you could have a cutout. You could have lots of padding, no padding, all sorts of different saddles for different types of people. This is where a fitting might come in. I have never done a fitting ever. I have figured out how to dial in my saddle adjustment and things like that based more on sheer damn luck than anything else, quite frankly. I would say getting a fitting, especially if you have found that touring or riding for long distances is uncomfortable, you may want to consider going to your local bike shop that has fittings and have them do it. It's super high tech, or can be super high tech, and they'll really work it through and get you dialed in the right way. That also is going to make an impact on what saddle that you end up getting. I know that a friend of the show, Cyrus Farvar, a bunch of emails that he was sending my direction recently, talked about getting a fitting for one of his bikes. And I think that that's just a smart idea if it makes sense for you. So take a look at your saddle and also think about getting a fitting if things just don't feel quite dialed in right for you. Last but not least, let's close it all out with just accoutrements, as I'll talk about this. This is just like rando other stuff. When you're looking at the bike frame, does it have a bunch of braze-ons to attach things? If your bike doesn't have a lot of places for water bottle cages and other things along those lines, you may want to rethink it. It's not like you can't use hose clamps and some other types of things to get those exterior add-ons on there, but the braze-ons make it better and more secure. So take a look at your frame that you're considering. Fenders. This is one where I think they're really helpful, if not musts. Are they a pain in the butt? Absolutely. But I'll tell you what, every single time I'm riding in the rain or riding on wet surfaces, I feel great because I know my drivetrain isn't getting flooded with muck and dirt and grit, and I don't have the big skunk line up my back. I do think fenders are a really good idea for touring. I have them on every bike, and I don't think I would ever not. The biggest thing that people think about, and I'm kind of putting it under accoutrements because, hey, it's whatever you want, racks or bags. If I were starting now, this is kind of the classic loaded touring versus bike packing setup. If I was starting now, I'll bet that I probably would go more for a bike packing setup. Why? Because you could do a bike packing setup for traditional touring. Now, does it mean you can't carry as much? Sure, but I think it's the most flexible. So if you're brand new to this, you may want to give that a look. But if you really are intent to do a lot of camping, want to be able to carry as many things as you want to, a bike packing setup may not give you as much stuff to carry. But if you're into kind of the whole minimalist thing, ultralight backpacking, bike packing may be the right kind of setup for you. And that's going to be a different type of bag setup rather than having a rack and traditional panniers. I would say you don't want to dismiss traditional pannier and rack touring. It's what I'm most comfortable with when I'm on long tours, just because, I can carry as much stuff as I want, and there's no real penalty to me. The bags exist, and, I watch my weight, of course, but I can kind of get whatever I want. Oh, did I see something cool? Did I see a pie I want to eat over the course of the next 2 days? Let's be honest, just one. Then maybe I'll pick up a pie and throw it into my pannier. It's stuff like that. There's opportunities that are available for you if you are going traditional pannier and rack touring that you don't have with bike packing. But I'm interested in that, and I think many of you would be as well. So, folks, that is it for what I look for in a bike touring bike. The essentials, if you will. Is everyone's bike going to be different? Yeah, and that's kind of the fun part. Comparing and contrasting the different types of bikes in camp. I think that's one of the most fun things about it. Everybody's got different preferences and different needs that align with all of this. So your bike, your most essential needs in your touring bike are almost assuredly going to be different than mine and then the next person over in camp. So make sure that you take all of this with a bit of a grain of salt and go with choices that meet your needs the most. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lien, Andrew MacGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrance Manson, Harry Telgadas, Chris Barron, Mark Van Raam, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LoGreco, Cody Floerchinger, Tom Benenati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollack, Joseph Quinn, Drue Porter, Byron Paterson, Joachim Raber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Frey, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Hankel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Avilés-Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Bigel, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Paterson, Sarus Faravar, and thanks also to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.